Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, again to give you everything you need to know about heroic Gallywix in the Undermine Raid. Phase 1, we're having 2 groups split up, and there's going to be 4 main quadrants to the room. What you're having is basically the raid starting in like the southeast and southwest corners, and then you can kind of jump to the northeast, northwest corners with your groups when you have to dodge some of the fire and the variety of void zones around. The encounter starts with this scatter blast canisters, which are the cone soaks that the raid needs to take care of. They're targeted onto the tank, and they need to be soaked by half the raid, as you are getting debuffed and you can't soak twice in a row. Soon after, the boss is going to spawn some crates from the sky and drop them. You have some time to get out of these, and he will then ignite them with a big bad bunch of bombs. Those fields detonate, and then they spawn more mini bombs that need to be dodged. And at the same time, the major heroic mechanic for the tanks, which is present throughout the encounter, the 1,500-pound dud, are going to spawn. This is where the tanks are going to need to swap very regularly, as the Gatling cannon from the boss is dealing additional damage whenever you are further away from the boss. So tanks need to swap. That tank that just got taunted off of runs out, clicks on the bomb, it detonates and knocks the tank back, and then they go back into melee, taunt the boss, take over the stacks for the boss. The other tank runs out and takes on the second of the 1,500-pound duds. Additionally, on heroic, you have to deal with the sapper satchel, which after the big bad bunch of bombs is going to put a bomb on one player. They are going to explode just like on normal difficulty, but on heroic, they also are placing an additional bomb at their location once the first bomb explodes. So they get targeted by a bomb, they run out of the group, they drop off that bomb, and then they get back into the group for additional healing. The scatter blast canisters happen every like 30 to 45 seconds, so you're very regularly cycling between healing cooldowns to assist your team. You need to clear off these negative heal absorbs constantly throughout the encounter, otherwise they explode and deal additional damage. So you want to make sure that you have a steady rotation of basically like one healer each time using a different cooldown for their group steadily throughout the fight. Once the boss reaches maximum energy, he begins phase 2. Now, this phase 2 push is Giga Coils, and it's featured heavily throughout the encounter. It lasts around 20 seconds, but it's dependent upon your group, which is a big reason why groups are overhealing, bringing 6, 7, 8 healers for 30-man groups. You have around 20 seconds that this Giga Coil damage is pulsing by the boss, but you can get out of this phase faster depending on when you kill off the adds and take care of these mines. The adds that spawn try to juice up the boss, which will then heal it, and when they die, they drop mines. All you have to do is use your extra action button when you're by the mines. That'll allow you to pick it up, and then using your extra action button again will throw them. There should be about 8 adds, and you'll see in the quadrants of the room the different coils that need to be sabotaged. So what you need to do is drop 2 of those mines in that section to then sabotage the machine, and then the machine is going to shut down, interrupt the boss, and then the boss is going to go out into the room and begin the rest of phase 2. Every single time that you're going into the Giga Coil phase, you're going to want to have at least one healer cooldown, but it's important to note that the more coils that you sabotage, the more damage is going to be going out onto your group. So you want to make sure that you are not overutilizing a lot of cooldowns, because at the start of phase 2 in particular, you start getting into some very quick sequences of really heavy damage. After the first Giga Coils that starts phase 2 is sabotage, boss moves to the edge of the room, spawns wrenchmongers that just beat the tanks really badly, and you should make sure you focus these down. You'll immediately start getting fused canisters, and these are targeted onto players themselves, so you can move them around in terms of their positioning. These need to be soaked and leave heal absorbs, and they deal a pretty decent amount of damage, and if you don't clear the absorbs, they explode for additional hits. The big bad bunch of bombs still exists in phase 2. Liquid noticed that they had an issue around the 4-minute mark in the encounter, where one of the crates would fall from the sky at the same time that they had to deal with the fused canisters. And so they ended up lock gating away from that bunch of bombs, soaking their fused canisters, and the tanks had to run back to make sure that they soaked the resulting 1,500-pound duds. Keep in mind, every time the boss reaches max energy, he goes back into the middle of the room and begins another Giga Coil phase. And once you have sabotaged the same area twice, then the field electrifies, and then you cannot even access that part of the room afterwards. So you need to make sure that you're constantly sabotaging a new quadrant of the room every single time. And then at the 5th round that the Giga Coils goes off, you could sabotage one section, it'll electrify it, and I believe after that point, then there will be the hard enrage to the fight where it'll just kind of pulse and kill everybody. But with 7 healers for Team Liquid, they were able to go about 9 minutes onto the encounter before reaching any sort of enrage, and we're fine. Once you reach 50% health on the boss, you can actually end up skipping one of those Giga Coil phases. Immediately at 50%, the boss gains a shield before it actually gets into its mech suit. It takes a lot of time for the mech suit to come out, so keep on burning that shield. The boss then places itself onto the mech suit and starts casting total destruction. Once you crack the shield, then you have to just get a simple interrupt. It'll stop some of that incoming damage, and in general, it's about 10 to 15 seconds of raid-wide AoE when that shield is being burned. Also on Heroic, you have to dodge some of the lightning fields that start to spawn out of the boss and start spinning around your players. If you're ranged, you can actually outrange that lightning field, stand further back, and just continue burning. Once you have burned that shield, this then begins phase 3. This is going to reset the boss's energy, and the same process continues where at max energy, the boss goes back into the middle and starts another Giga Coil cycle, requiring you to do the same thing. Kill the ads, sabotage the coils, and when you sabotage those coils, 4 of the mines need to be used to sabotage said coils, and then 4 of the mines can be chucked off the platform. Now that the boss is in its mech suit, instead of casting the big bad bomb crates, it'll actually cast the bigger, badder bomb blast, which is a tank frontal. Tanks need to run this out of the group so that they're not going to hit anybody else. And once they take that damage, it'll then spawn 2 duds. Just like you had to before, the tank that had run out can instantly grab their dud just by clicking on it, getting knocked back, taunt the boss, the other tank can run out and go clear their dud as well. If you have people with immunities, they can help you out as well. You can like bubble and go click on the dud so it doesn't have to impact your team or anything along those lines. Keep in mind, there's gonna be a lot of damage on the tanks because they're also dealing with the ego check. It's a 4-hit knuckle sandwich, which inflicts a ton of damage for every strike, and 75% of the unmitigated damage is translated into a dot for 22 seconds. While the tanks are dealing with this, the raid has to deal with TikTok canisters, which, unlike the fused canisters, are not targeted and attached to a player, but they spawn near players, near the boss, and are 3 different soaks. These, similarly, need to be soaked by the raid, do a bunch of damage, and have a negative heal absorb attached to them that you want to make sure that you're soaking. Once you leave Giga Coil phases, the most common thing is that you have a sequence where you leave the Giga Coil phase, TikTok canisters spawn, they need to get soaked, and then shortly afterwards, the boss is casting suppression. This was cast in the first phase, and it's on normal difficulty, and it spawns fire, but on phase 3, on normal and on heroic, in addition to the fire that you need to dodge, the boss is casting the Gallywix Finale Blast, which does massive AoE damage, and it is drop-off damage as well. So you're running away from the boss, dropping fire with the suppression fire that's following players, and you're getting as far away from the boss as possible to reduce the damage out of that finale blast. This means that right after you get out of each Giga Coil phase, TikTok canister spawn, you'll be wanting to watch as a healer the suppression timers because you will need a huge amount of output to muscle heal through the canister detonation and then keep everybody healthy before the suppression cast goes off. This is a massive time to use defensives, especially as the more Giga Coil phase you go into, the higher the boss's damage is going to be. For a first kill in Heroic, you can expect to go through 5 total cycles of Giga Coils. You'll probably go through 1 or 2 before you hit phase 3, where you push the boss to 50%. Ideally, you shouldn't have more than 2 before you hit the boss into phase 3. Liquid was actually bloodlusting on pull because all of your damage is very relevant on this encounter. And they also, on their first kill, went into a 5th cycle, a total cycle of Giga Coils, which electrified 1 section of the room in order to interrupt the boss, and then they needed to drag the boss very far away from that electrified section so that they didn't have to worry about TikTok canisters being spawned in that space. They even had a couple pulls where the boss was in that space that was electrified because it just had popped out of the Giga Coil phase. It dropped canisters and they had to burn like every cooldown whatsoever to be able to survive. The biggest thing on this fight is honestly overhealing it and making sure that you're not having anybody like having to like catastrophic failure for mechanics. It's kind of one of these encounters where you just need to live till the end of the encounter, and you have a decent amount of breathing room to be able to meet the DPS check before the boss just burns you down. So overhealing is a massive benefit, and making sure from the very beginning of the encounter that you basically have every healer doing a cooldown separate from each other, so you're not overlapping too heavily, and then you can more freely use your healer cooldowns every single time you have another fuse canister, TikTok canister, or suppression going into phase 3. Often you can save healing cooldowns for like the first or second giga coils that you fight, because they don't deal too much damage and you shouldn't last more than like 15 or 20 seconds in those phases. But the later ones, you absolutely need to make sure that you have healing cooldowns going up in the first 5 or 10 seconds of those giga coils, because they just ramp and build up over time. Big thanks to Liquid for lending me this footage to be able to help you guys out. Let me know if there were any other sort of questions that you have. And as we have logs established, I would highly recommend checking out lorgs.io to help you along with your healing cooldown journey and with your setup. There is basically a massive amount of healer CDs that need to be utilized on this fight, and most of the strategy that I've seen thus far has basically just been on desyncing them as early as you possibly can, and then naturally rotating through the next cooldown that you have available as they start coming up. The biggest things to watch out for are by far going to be your canisters, depending on your phase, later giga coil incoming damage, and making sure you have a huge amount of healing for your tanks to support them as you're going out into phase 3. So hopefully this helped. Big love to our patrons for making all this content possible. Hope you guys enjoyed and found it helpful. I'll catch y'all next time.